Okay, today I'm going to talk about 3 different ways that you can enhance your rendering. So any project that you do, you can use these kind of principles, and you don't have to use them exactly the way that I'm using them, but maybe you can take some tips from them and use them in different ways. And there are plenty more things that you can do, but basically these are 3 different things that you could try to look to do in any project to kind of give your rendering or your end product a little bit more to it. So I'll quickly give some examples of just some previous projects that we did. These are all just projects that we created from our live stream recently or in the last few months. And some of these look a little bit similar because we were just talking about some of the same subjects maybe. But all of these use some of the 3 things that I'm about to talk about. So you can kind of just see some different ones here. And all right, so we'll get started here. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is using color to create some contrast. So this could be lighting and color. And so this basically is, we're focusing on talking about the backdrop or what you want the eye to focus on. So when you're sort of decision maker, whoever's looking at your rendering at the end of the day, as soon as they look at it, their eye's going to kind of go to one spot, right? So and typically you have control of where that's going to go, right? So when you're setting up your lighting, your screens, all that sort of thing, you can think about this stuff. So a lot of times you have requirements in your projects, right? We need a specific amount of screens to be there. We need them to be a certain size and all that sort of thing. So let's say you have, in this scenario, this is just an example, but there's quite a lot going on here. But we're still, again, trying to make sure that the eyes go to certain spots here. So this isn't the perfect example, but I thought it was decent because there's quite a lot going on. So we have 3 screens, and we have some scenery and some people on stage here. So what we did with lighting is, this is typically what you want to do always, is create some type of stage wash so that your people on stage are going to be well lit. And not only does it make it so that they're not in the shadows, obviously, but it will also draw your viewers' eyes towards them. So if you're in the seating here, say you're sitting at one of these seats, it's easy for your eyes to focus on them because they're the most well lit, whereas if they were in the dark, your eyes would always be looking over here. And then secondly, so you kind of create that tier sort of hierarchy. So your eyes maybe go here first, and then the second brightest thing might be the screens. And this is usually pretty easy because your screens are always quite bright anyways. But if your content's pretty bright, that's going to be pretty easy to do. And then we'll kind of go down the line. So the third sort of thing that you might want your viewer to see is the backdrop. So we still want to make it look nice, but we don't want it to be competing with what's in front. So we have some kind of cooler colors here that don't compete too much. These yellows are probably the brightest colors, so your eyes are definitely going to go a little bit towards those. But what you can do now is you can select different objects, and I have these grouped. So I have these up and down lights on this drape here. I'm just going to select this drape here, and I could obviously change this any color. I could change the intensity, but you can play with it and say, okay, if I change this to yellow, that looks kind of cool because it works with some of the other yellows, but is it competing with the other stuff? And maybe you use the yellow, but you just turn it down a bit, so you still have maybe like an amberish gold or something like that, but it's just not as bright. Because again, you just get too messy if there's too much in there. I did the same thing with the backdrop. So we have like a big scrim back here, and I have a bunch of lights on this for some reason. So you can see it's turned down quite a bit. If I were to increase the intensity a lot, it would just be, again, it looks kind of cool, but at the same time, it's just way too much to handle for your eyes. So if you want them to focus on a little bit other, you just kind of turn that down, or potentially change the color to something darker. In this case, it's kind of like a dark purplish pink, so you probably don't need to do too much, but things like blues and purples, potentially some colors like that will work well to kind of create a little darker look behind you there. Cool, so I'll bring that up. All right, so the next thing I want to quickly talk about here, so that's kind of how to draw your eye towards something. There's 2 other things here that I want to talk about. One is creating camera views. So obviously once you're done, instead of just kind of going out here and creating like a wide camera view so you can see the whole room, that can definitely be cool. Maybe your decision maker again wants to know that, like what the room looks like in total overall. But it can look also much cooler and much just nicer, again, if you do some sort of closer up or mid-range shots as well. So if you go up into the camera view here and then save cameras, you can create camera views. And what I usually do is I'll go to the first person camera here, and this allows me to kind of move around like I'm in a first person video game or something. And I'll find like a decent spot. It might take a minute, to find a couple of decent spots because you want to get the whole backdrop and view and all that. But you might come down here to maybe one of the tables and sort of get this table a little bit out of focus. So if I right click on the table, it goes in focus. If I right click over to the people on stage, it's going to focus on them. There's a couple things here. So once you've got your shot, your camera angle, everything in view, there's a couple things that I want to talk about with the camera view. So one is to try to not widen your camera angle too much. Again, this can look cool sometimes and it can, again, show the whole camera view. But if you leave it to where your camera lens is more straight on, it makes everything so that it's not skewed as much and it just looks better as well in the end. So a lot of times too, what you can do is align the edges of your camera with the vertical lines in the scene. So if I have these screens, you can see that easily that if I go to the edge of the camera here, my edge of my camera is aligned with the vertical line there. So that would be different if I had my camera angle up like this. Now all of a sudden everything is off angle, right? So this angle is like this angle's straight on, up and down. And again, you don't have to stick to the stuff for all the time. It doesn't necessarily work, depending on what you have in the scene, but it does make everything look scaled better and it just looks more professional overall if you try to keep things aligned that way. And then finally with this step that I'm talking about right now, the camera views, you can do one last thing, which is, again, you don't have to use the focus as well. So if you don't want to get this to be out of focus, you can just go to settings and turn this focus feature off, and that will just make everything in focus. And then lastly, we have this contrast effect on here, which basically just outlines things in black. And some people might think it maybe looks a little bit outlined like a cartoonish. So you can turn that off by just hitting this contrast button here. And the reason that it's on by default is so that you can see things a little bit easier in the dark. So sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. So now we just have a soft effect there. And I'm going to get maybe a little bit closer here. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit this plus sign to save my camera view. And then after that's done, I might come in and get a closer view. And so this is one thing that's a little bit hard to get, is that if you're coming up close like this, you're not going to be able to get the whole set in the scene. So what I do is I typically will create a view that's further back so you can see the whole scene, and then I'll do another view where I'm kind of cutting off one of the screens that's over there so that you at least get two of the screens in there, and that still looks pretty good. And now I get more detail in the scene, so I can see all the people on stage, the scenery is better, and you get a little bit more detail. Because at the end of the day, if you create all this stuff and then you take a shot, your camera view is like way back here. This is nice to see the front view. I usually do a front view, a side view, and then like a close-up shot. This is nice, but you don't get close enough to see kind of the detail of some of the more nuanced things. All right, so that's step number 2, or tip number 2 rather. And then the last one would be, we're talking about just basically another camera thing, which is sort of cropping the photo. So this is kind of just like a post-production thing that you would do in something like Photoshop or another program, maybe Canva or something. But I typically do this because when you create a rendering, you're going to get the whole camera view. So you're going to get this whole monitor size, right, which is 4K rendering. And in a lot of cases, again, maybe you're up here, it still looks nice, but if you kind of cut off the top and the bottom a little bit, or sort of do a letterboxing effect, it's going to make it look a little more sort of epic and sort of cinematic, if you will. So I often like to at least do a little bit of that letterboxing look, whether you crop it completely or just add some black boxes to the top and bottom. It usually only takes a second to do it in another program. So you can kind of get an idea of what that would look like if you leave the UI on. I'm just switching it on and off by hitting H on my keyboard to hide it. And so you can kind of get a look of what it will look like here, right? And then you can just adjust that later. So those three things should help quite a bit. Again, trying to keep, the first thing was looking at color and lighting to try to draw your eye into specific things, right? That hierarchy, whether it's the people on stage, screens, or whatever else you want it to be. And then the second thing was creating camera views at different areas, and then also trying to make the camera views align with certain things in your rendering so that it's not skewed and it doesn't look off, so it looks a little more professional. And then finally this last one, which is just adding some cropping to the image to kind of, again, it gives it just another level of sort of professionalism and finish. Cool. So that's all I got for you today. We'll definitely talk about some other topics next week. And then this Friday, we'll do another live stream just talking about some different subjects and answering any questions live for anyone who joins. So definitely be sure to jump on that if you can. We do it usually around 10 or 11 a.m. On Friday, and that's Mountain Time. And if you want to learn any more or see anything more about the program, definitely go over to eventrender.com. All right, thanks.